Oh, my dear.
Have you ever heard of a baby thrown in a hospital dumpster just because her skin looked different?
Don't listen to them.
On a stormy night, an old woman scavenging for bottles heard faint cries from a trash bin. Inside was a newborn girl shivering in a hospital cloth, her mottled skin unlike anything she'd seen. The woman clutched her tightly and whispered, "If the world abandons you, I will need you." But here's the shocking truth. That baby was the biological daughter of a wealthy woman who bribed a doctor to secretly swap her imperfect child with the healthy newborn of another wife. The girl she brought home wasn't even hers. This story, backed by hospital records and a DNA test, reveals a web of betrayal, stolen motherhood, and brutal class prejudice. You'll see. A poor girl mocked all her life rise above everyone who looked down on her. A forgotten mother return with undeniable proof, and a young man choose love not for looks, but for the soul inside. This is Amara's story, a girl once thrown away, now standing tall as a symbol of dignity. Don't scroll past. What you're about to witness may restore your faith in truth, justice, and the human spirit. The wind scraped down the alley like nails on rusted metal. Back behind the hospital, past the bins of stained sheets and rotting food, a dented metal trash can creaked open and shut. The chain holding the lid had snapped years ago. Now it clanged softly in rhythm with the gusts, like a weary bell tolling for no one. Nurai hunched low beside it, her fingers trembling against the cold. Her breath came out thin, shallow. She coughed, sharp and dry, one hand clutching her rib. A smell of disinfectant and urine clung to her clothes. The rain earlier had soaked the cardboard she slept on, so now she moved slowly, searching. Plastic bottles, needle caps, crumpled biscuit wrappers, anything she could sell. She wasn't supposed to be here. They'd threatened to call security again, but hunger didn't wait for permission. The wind shifted, and then she heard it. Not the wind, not a cat, not even the rustling of leaves. A sound too soft to be warning, but too human to ignore. A cry. No, less than a cry. A rasp. Like someone trying to scream with a crushed throat. Nurai froze. The air held still, like the moment before thunder. She shuffled closer to the bin, every bone in her body protesting. She gripped the edge, peeled the lid back. Inside the pile of torn linen, her eyes caught the faintest motion. A twitch. She leaned in, squinting under the yellow hospital light flickering overhead. And there it was, a tiny shape, still wet. Skin blotched with pale patches like bleach stains. Wrapped in a thin hospital blanket, limbs barely thicker than her fingers. A newborn. Its lips were blue, but it moved. Nurai gasped. Her knees gave, and she nearly collapsed into the bin. One tiny hand reached out, clenched and unclenched. She saw the bracelet then, half slid off the wrist. White plastic, cracked. Printed in faded ink. B1, 2347. She stared, blinked, looked again. The baby wasn't dead. Not yet. She reached in with trembling arms. The infant was colder than the wind. Her own skin burned with the touch. It opened its eyes, only halfway, and coughed. That cough, wet, broken, fragile, sounded exactly like her own. Nurai wrapped the blanket tighter around its tiny chest, held it close to her hollow chest, listened. The heartbeat was faint, but there. She looked up at the hospital windows above, closed. No one watching. She looked back down. "No," she whispered. "No, not like this." She didn't ask why, didn't wonder who. There wasn't time for reasons. She only knew one thing. If she left this child here, it would die before the sun came up. She stood. Her back screamed, her chest wheezed, but she stood. The blanket slipped slightly, and she adjusted it. Beneath the baby's left ear, a strange mark caught her eye, a small smudge-shaped birthmark just under the earlobe. The baby let out another weak sob. Nurai's tears fell without warning. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "If the world threw you out, then I will be your world." The wind howled down the alley once more, but inside her arms, something warm had sparked, a fragile, flickering flame, and Nurai would guard it with her life. She found an old tarp behind the incinerator shed, shielded them from the worst of the wind, sat against the wall, legs cramping, the child against her chest. She watched the lights blink across the city skyline. That glowing world had never had space for someone like her. But maybe for this child there was a chance. She tucked the bracelet into her dress pocket deep beneath the layers. If anyone came looking, they wouldn't find it. Not unless she wanted them to. The sun rose slow and red, slicing through the smog like a dull blade. Nurai stirred, stiff and cold. The child was quieter now, breathing steadier, still burning with fever, but alive. She moved carefully, wrapping the baby against her chest using strips torn from her skirt. Her body blocked the morning breeze. She made her way through the side streets, away from the hospital, past the rusted pipes and sagging fences, into the corner of the world where names didn't matter. The marketplace was beginning to stir. Not the big one. Not the clean one with uniforms and receipts. The other one, the real one, where broken vegetables sold for half price, where the elderly traded salt for candles, and nobody asked where you slept at night. She passed Auntie Noku, who sold overripe mangoes with a cracked tooth and sharp tongue. "Where you been all night, Nurai?" the woman called out. "Chasing angels," she replied, voice hoarse. Auntie Noku squinted. "That a baby under your shawl?" Nurai didn't answer, because what was there to say? She kept walking, step by painful step, until she reached the stall she sometimes cleaned for, the fishmonger's cousin, who sold cassava and looked the other way if she took scraps. The woman looked at her, eyes narrowing at the bulge beneath the fabric. "You finally steal one, old woman?" she said, half joking. Nurai didn't smile. "I saved her." And for once, the woman said nothing. That night, under the canvas sheet behind the cassava stall, Nurai fed the baby warm water with sugar from a spoon. Her hands shook. The child cried softly, then fell asleep with one fist curled against Nurai's chest. She looked at the bracelet again, its numbers burned into her mind. B.2347. She'd seen hospital codes before, knew what it meant. B1, likely the delivery room, 2347. Time of birth, or of abandonment. She imagined the mother, rich maybe, or terrified, or ashamed. Or worse, someone who didn't even hesitate. Nurai bit her tongue until it bled. The baby stirred. Its skin was still discolored, but the warmth had returned. She traced the birthmark again, a crescent-like smudge beneath the ear. She would remember it, even if no one else would. Weeks passed. Nurai named her Amara, meaning grace. A cruel name for such a beginning, maybe, but the child had survived a metal bin, the wind, the dark. She had earned every letter of it. The neighbors whispered. Some pitied, some judged, but none took her in. It didn't matter. Each day, Nurai scavenged twice as far, begged harder, bargained more. Every night, she sang the child to sleep, off-key, raspy, but full of love. Then, one evening, just after sunset, she returned to the alley to search for spare fabric and paused. The trash bin was gone. In its place, a new plastic container, shiny, locked. The hospital had finally replaced it. She stared at the empty space, her chest clenched. That bin had nearly been a grave, but instead it had become a cradle. She took a breath, smelled bleach and burning, clutched Amara tighter, and walked away. Years later, people would ask her how she knew the baby wasn't dead, and she would say, "I didn't." But the moment those tiny fingers touched her hand, something had reached deeper than fear, deeper than pain. It was the sound, the smallest sound. A cry, not loud, not desperate, but insistent, as if the soul inside that broken body refused to be forgotten. And on that night when the world had turned its back, Nurai had turned toward the sound. Not out of duty, not out of hope, but because in that cry she had heard herself. And for the first time in decades, she chose to answer. The baby wasn't crying, it was screaming, piercing, desperate. a sound that shouldn't belong to something so small. McKenna gritted her teeth and looked away. Her legs were still in stirrups, her nightgown damp with sweat and blood. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled her nose, but it couldn't mask the stench of fear rising in her throat. A nurse moved swiftly, wrapping the newborn in a blanket, glancing once at McKenna's face, then at the baby's skin. The nurse's eyebrows twitched, almost imperceptibly, but McKenna saw it. The doctor stepped in next, face already drawn. He took the child from the nurse, examined quickly, then froze. The faintest sigh escaped him. McKenna sat up on one elbow, ignoring the pain tearing through her abdomen. "Give her to me." The doctor hesitated. She stretched out her hands, and then she saw blotches, faint at first but spreading down the infant's arm, pale, irregular patches across an otherwise dark brown canvas, like the ink of her lineage had been smudged. The scream caught in McKenna's chest. She didn't move, didn't blink. The baby whimpered again, a weak, helpless sound. McKenna's eyes flicked to the nurse, then the doctor, then the metal tray beside her, the scissors, the basin of blood, the half-written forms. "Is this a joke?" The doctor swallowed. "No, madam, she's breathing well, healthy lungs." McKenna's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Then why does she look like this?" The doctor didn't answer. McKenna pushed herself upright. Pain pulsed through her spine, but she didn't care. She reached for the blanket, pulled it back more. The baby's chest was rising and falling, her tiny fingers curled and uncurled. But that skin, blotched, uneven. McKenna's jaw tightened. No one in our family, no one ever looked like this. The doctor looked down. Then she reached under her pillow, pulled out an envelope. Thick, clean, taped shut. She handed it to him without looking. "You'll forget this child ever existed." He froze. McKenna's voice was cold, precise, toned like a blade. "I don't want her registered under my name. I don't want her in my records. I want you to write another report, a different one." "Madame?" "She didn't survive." Silence stretched. The doctor looked at the child again, still breathing, still fighting. McKenna leaned forward, eyes blazing. "She's not mine." She said it slowly, like a curse. And that was that. So, 2 corridors down, in another ward barely lit by flickering overhead lights, a different cry pierced the room. Lerato gasped, drenched in sweat, her lips cracked, her hair soaked. Her husband was not beside her. He had died months before in a construction accident. She'd come here alone, clutching a threadbare towel and a pair of newborn socks. They handed her the baby with smiles. "Beautiful girl," the nurse whispered. Lerato wept with joy. Her hands trembled as she cradled the child, bringing her close to her chest. She whispered a name in the baby's ear, a name she had chosen long before pain, before grief, before life got messy. "She's perfect," she murmured. The nurse nodded. But then something shifted. The child's breathing changed, a hiccup, then a long pause, a wheeze, her tiny chest rising irregularly. "Wait, she's not." The nurse rushed forward, took the baby gently, checked, called for help. Lerato's body went still. Another nurse ran in, murmured something, their faces twisted. The older nurse shook her head, eyes downcast. "I'm so sorry." No, she was breathing. She was born weak. Her lungs didn't hold. We tried everything." No, let me see her. Please, I'm sorry." They never showed her the baby again. Lerato collapsed back onto the bed, hollow, arms aching from where her child had been. In a private room upstairs, warm and quiet, McKenna lay back in clean sheets. Her face had softened. Her hair was brushed neatly behind her ears. Outside the window, the city blinked with golden lights, oblivious. The nurse brought her a different baby. This one had even skin, full cheeks, a small, perfect mouth. McKenna sat up slowly, reached out. The nurse handed her the child with quiet reverence. McKenna studied the baby for a long moment. Something shifted behind her eyes. Relief, maybe, or triumph. "Much better," she whispered. The nurse said nothing. The doctor stepped in, holding the clipboard. "Here's the certificate. She was born at 23:52, female, 7 pounds. McKenna nodded once. "Obasi will be pleased." She smiled. She cradled the child who wasn't hers. Outside, hospital staff continued moving. Machines beeped. Births and deaths came and went. But in that room, history had bent quietly. No one would speak of it. No one would know, except the child. Lorado didn't leave for hours. She sat in silence, staring at the peeling paint. She pressed the baby's socks to her chest. Her eyes were dry. Too dry. No funeral, no body, just a vague explanation. Sometimes babies don't make it. Sometimes there are complications. Sometimes the universe rips out the thing you love before you even know how to hold it. She walked home with a hollow stomach and bleeding heart. The streets were wet from recent rain. Her feet ached, her body heavier than before. But the heaviest thing was the silence in her arms. She laid the socks in a wooden box beside her bed, folded carefully, lit a candle, and wept. But only once. After that, she did not cry again. Makina's homecoming was lavish. Obasi had arranged a feast. Friends and family gathered in bright fabrics and bold laughter. They clapped as she stepped from the car, the baby in her arms, radiant under a woven shawl. The press snapped photos. Makina's mother-in-law kissed her cheek. "She has Obasi's nose," she said. Makina smiled. Inside, champagne flowed. A band played softly. Obasi looked every bit the proud father, though he hadn't been there for the birth. Business trip, he claimed. Makina didn't care. What mattered was the child in her arms, the name already inked into the family register, Zuri. "Zuri means beautiful," someone said. Makina nodded, "Because she is," the guests cooed. Makina held the child tighter. But somewhere deep inside, something stayed taut. A tension unspoken, a shadow she refused to acknowledge, because if she did, she might hear the other baby crying again. In a ward far away, a nurse lit a cigarette she wasn't supposed to have. Her hands shook. She looked over her shoulder once more. The forms had been filed, the envelopes distributed, the exchange made. She exhaled slowly. Her shift ended in 12 minutes. She wondered if she'd sleep tonight. Probably not. She remembered the blotches on that baby's skin, the way its fingers had curled, the way its chest had risen and fallen, stubborn, alive, the look in Makina's eyes, and the doctor's trembling hand. She threw the cigarette on the ground, crushed it, and walked away. That night, Lorado dreamed of her baby. She saw her in a field of grass, running, laughing, the sun on her skin. She called out to her, but the child didn't hear. She kept running further until she disappeared. Lorado woke with a jolt, gasped for breath, her body empty. She pressed a hand to her chest, swore she'd heard a cry, but her room was silent. Still, too still. Makina stood by the crib. Zuri lay sleeping. Perfect skin, even breath. A small scratch had appeared near her ear, perhaps from the blanket or her own tiny nails. Makina traced it lightly, then frowned. Not a scratch, a mark, a smudge-shaped crescent, barely visible but there. She stepped back, a flicker of memory, faint, a breath in the wrong direction. She closed the curtains tight and turned away. At the far end of the city, beneath a flickering streetlight, the nurse who had cleaned the floor that night found something lodged beneath the supply cart, a white plastic band, cracked. It read B1, 2347. She turned it over in her hand, paused, then dropped it into her coat pocket. Some things you don't throw away, even when no one's watching. Something wet slapped her cheek. Not rain, fish guts. Auntie Mumby scowled from her stall, holding a cleaver in one hand and a scaly tail in the other. "Wake up, girl, the mackerel's not going to sell itself." Amara blinked hard, her hands already moving on instinct, pushing the rusted cart of greens forward, dodging puddles of fish water, guts, spit. The air reeked of charcoal, dried crayfish, pepper oil, and sweat that had soaked into fabric and never left. It was barely dawn. The sky above was still bleeding purple and orange. But the market was already alive, buzzing, yelling, pushing. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. The weight of the cassava leaves leaned heavily against her spine. Her ankles throbbed. Her palms itched from yesterday's burns. She hadn't eaten since noon the day before, but she smiled anyway. A wide, toothy, sunburst smile that defied the ache in her bones. That smile had become her armor. She moved past the banana lady, past the honey seller with the lazy eye, past the meat boys who always winked and offered her bones they didn't need. At the far corner, where the sun hit hardest, she spread her mat, dusted it once, and knelt. The girls beside her laughed. One had new shoes, another wore lip gloss too red for morning. They whispered when she arrived. They always did. Amara unfolded the sackcloth. The vegetables inside were wilting, some stems bruised, a few leaves torn, but they were hers. She arranged them with care. Then she saw them. 4 boys, barefoot, dirty-faced, darting between stalls like flies. One of them spotted her and grinned. She knew what was coming. They came fast, loud. "Ghost girl! Longo witch! Don't touch her or your skin will peel." They surrounded her mat, laughing. One grabbed a bundle of greens and tossed it into the air. Another yanked at her bag. Amara stood up, lips tight. "Leave," she said. The smallest boy sneered. "Make us." He reached for her shirt and yanked. The fabric tore halfway down the side. Gasps rose from nearby vendors. Laughter, too. Her skin flashed in the sunlight. Uneven, blotched. As if the gods had spilled milk across her shoulders and forgot to clean it up. She didn't cover herself, didn't shrink. She looked each of them in the eye slowly, one by one. "I don't need your skin," she said. Her voice was quiet, but something in it cut through the noise. The boys froze. The smallest one hesitated, then spat at her feet. The group turned and ran. Silence settled around her. The vendors stared. Amara bent down, picked up the spilled greens, folded the torn edge of her shirt, and sat back down. She kept her hands moving. That smile never came back. Not yet. Later, after the sun had climbed high and the vendors began fanning their faces with folded newspapers, an older woman with silver beads in her head passed by. She wore soft sandals and walked like someone who belonged somewhere quiet. Lorado hadn't meant to stop. She had come to find yam flour, that's all. But then she saw her. The girl kneeling on a frayed mat, arms sun-browned and strong. Her shirt hung lopsided, torn, but she didn't fuss with it. Her eyes were alert, her fingers fast. And her skin, Lorado's throat dried. That pattern, that particular scattering of pale patches along her neck, then down to the edge of her collarbone. It tugged at something buried deep, something old, something long shut. A nurse once told her there had been marks, but grief had smothered details. Time had blurred everything. Until now. Amara felt the stare. She looked up. Lorado was frozen. Amara's brows lifted, cautious but not afraid. "Want some greens, madam?" she asked. Her voice was warm, soft. Lorado opened her mouth, then closed it, then walked away. Her chest tightened with every step. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring out at nothing, clutching a scarf that didn't smell like her child anymore, somewhere in that market. Something had called her back. Amara helped Nirai fold clothes that night. The old woman's fingers were slower now. Her breath came in wheezes, but her words still carried weight. "They tore your shirt again," Nirai said. Amara didn't answer. "They fear what they don't understand. They don't fear me, they hate me." Nirai paused. "You're not here to be liked." Amara nodded once. She looked down at her palms. Calloused, strong. "You were born under the death moon," Nirai continued, stacking the clothes. "The same night, my chest coughed blood for the first time." Amara didn't ask what that meant. She knew better than to interrupt when the wind blew strange in the room. "You didn't die," Nirai said. "Because of you." "No." The old woman shook her head. "Because something said no, to death, to forgetting." Amara folded a blouse, then said, almost to herself, "Do you think my mother is alive?" The question hovered like dust in still air. Nirai didn't answer, just reached for the bundle beside her. Inside, an old plastic bracelet, the letters worn, but still there. B1 2347. She didn't hand it to Amara. She simply looked at it, then slipped it back, and continued folding. The next day the market was quieter. A light drizzle kept the usual chaos at bay. Amara stood beneath a sheet of torn tarp, hands deep in a tub of yams, when a voice behind her made her pause. "Excuse me." She turned. It was the woman from before, Lerato. This time her voice was steady. "I'd like to buy some leaves." Amara reached for the best bundle. Lerato hesitated. Her gaze swept the girl's face, then her neck, then the spot beneath the ear. There, a birthmark. Small, crescent-shaped, faint. Lerato's fingers twitched. She took the bundle, handed over the coins. Their hands touched. Something electric passed between them. Neither spoke, but both knew something had just shifted. Later that evening, Lerato sat at her table, staring at an old photograph. The edges were curling. The baby in the picture had been wrapped in a white blanket, her mouth open mid-cry. Lerato traced the edge of the photo. The wind outside whispered through the window crack. She reached into her drawer, pulled out the socks, still folded, still soft, still waiting. Back in the market, under the glow of an oil lamp, Amara sat beside Nyarai. The bracelet was in her lap. She traced the letters over and over with one finger. Her voice was barely audible. "I saw a woman today. She looked at me like she knew me." "She does," Nyarai said. "How would you know?" "Because I saw her too." They sat in silence. Outside, the market dogs howled at nothing. The vase shattered before anyone could stop her. Porcelain rained down in sharp echoes, scattering across the marble floor like pieces of a broken throne. Zuri stood above it, her chin lifted, expression unreadable. Around her, silence spread through the sitting room like a stain. The air had been filled with laughter just moments ago. Champagne flutes half full, violin music drifting from hidden speakers, perfume clinging to velvet curtains. But now, all of it had been swallowed by the sound of one act. Obasi's prized vase, imported from Florence, one of a kind. A wedding gift he'd carried through customs himself, wrapped in his own coat. Gone. The guests froze mid-sip. A server blinked behind her tray. A cousin dropped his wine glass in slow motion. Only Makina moved. She rose from the sofa, smoothing her silk dress as though she needed something to hold on to. "Zuri," she said. Not shouted, not hissed. Just that one name heavy with warning. Zuri didn't flinch. Her heels clicked once against the marble as she took a step back from the wreckage. She looked down, then up again, directly into her mother's eyes. "I didn't like it," she said. Makina's nostrils flared. "That vase was older than you," she said tightly. "It was ugly," Zuri replied, "and fake." Makina's hand moved fast, but Zuri moved faster. The sound of the slap never came. Instead, there was another crack, softer than porcelain, but louder somehow. Zuri's palm across her mother's cheek. Makina staggered, not because the force was great, but because it happened at all. She touched her face slowly, as if unsure it was real. Her fingers trembled against her cheekbone. Zuri's voice dropped. "I'm not your puppet." The room held its breath. Later, the pieces were swept into a velvet pouch and hidden. The guests were ushered into the East Garden for cocktails. Obasi hadn't even arrived yet, his flight delayed, and Makina was left in a wide room that felt suddenly too bright. She sat alone now, staring at the chair across from her. It was empty. She reached for her glass, but her hand paused midway. Her reflection in the window looked older, thinner. The slap still burned faintly on her skin. Not pain. Not really. Something else. Zuri had never done that before. She'd screamed, slammed doors, broken the heel off a $500 shoe, but never this. Makina tried to replay the moment, tried to imagine it differently, tried to excuse it as a tantrum. But something had shifted. Zuri had looked her in the eye, and she hadn't looked away. Upstairs, Zuri locked her bedroom door. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply kicked off her shoes and peeled the diamonds from her ears, tossing them into the drawer without care. The mirror caught her face. She stared at it for a long moment, noticing something. She looked clearer, less dressed, more real. Makina always said Zuri was her mirror, that her success, her elegance, her image, all of it was reflected in her daughter's perfection. But Zuri had never felt like a mirror. She felt like a mannequin, a hollow version of something someone else had sculpted. She sat at the edge of her bed, one foot tapping against the marble tile. McKenna would come soon, apologize, or punish, depending on which mask she reached for first. Zuri didn't care, because she finally understood something she hadn't before. She had power, and it didn't come from bloodlines or brand names. It came from truth, even if she didn't fully know hers yet. Hort. Downstairs, McKenna stared at the locked study door. Obasi's study. She never entered without him. But today she did. The key was still in the lock. She stepped inside. The air smelled of old paper and tobacco and wood polished too often. She touched the edge of the desk, then walked to the shelf where the vase used to sit when it wasn't being displayed. There were documents there. Old ones. Birth certificates, photos, receipts for private doctors. She brushed her fingers across one envelope, paused, took it out. Her hands didn't shake, but her breath did. Inside, a faded photo, a baby wrapped in a blue hospital blanket. She flipped it over. Being 2347. Written in black ink. She hadn't remembered keeping this, but here it was. The room felt too small now. She closed the envelope, slipped it back into its drawer, and turned to leave. But something inside her chest refused to settle. Zuri's voice echoed again in her skull. Not a puppet, not yours. McKenna opened the drawer again, this time slower. She pulled out a second photo. This one was different. A hospital bracelet, white, worn. She closed her eyes. Zuri had never worn one, not when she arrived. McKenna had asked for the hospital to keep it off, said it might irritate her skin. But this bracelet had a name, a time, a code. She had buried that memory so deep she almost convinced herself it hadn't happened. But here it was, a breath from the past, and Zuri's slap had dug it back up. Zuri wandered into the East Wing that evening, after the guests had left and the staff had gone quiet. The walls there were covered in paintings, portraits of women with cold eyes and sharp collars. Ancestry, McKenna called it. Legacy. Zuri walked past them without looking. She ended up in the conservatory. It smelled of jasmine and lemons and something else, something metallic, almost like old blood on steel. The glass ceiling was fogged. Moonlight filtered through in a soft haze. She sat on the floor, surrounded by flowers McKenna paid a gardener to keep alive. One of the petals brushed her knee. Soft, delicate, but real. She reached out, plucked the flower, held it in her palm. She thought of the vase and how easily it had broken. McKenna watched her from the hallway. Zuri hadn't noticed her, or maybe she had and simply didn't care. McKenna stepped back, closed her eyes. She remembered the nurse's face, the way she had looked away, the way the envelope had slid into her coat pocket. She remembered the child's skin, and the decision she had made with the coolness of someone choosing curtains, not children. McKenna opened her eyes, and for a split second, just one, she saw herself the way Zuri might see her, and she flinched. The next morning, Zuri descended the grand staircase barefoot, her hair loose, her dress wrinkled. McKenna nearly dropped her tea. Zuri sat at the table, poured herself a cup, didn't speak. McKenna waited. And then, Zuri said, stirring slowly, I used to wonder why you never told me about the day I was born. McKenna didn't respond. Zuri sipped. Not a single detail, not the hospital, not the weather, not even what I weighed. McKenna looked down at her spoon. It was raining, she said quietly. Zuri raised an eyebrow. McKenna's voice cracked a little. You were quiet when you came out, no crying, just staring. Zuri let the silence hang, then stood. I'm not your decoration, Mother. She walked away. McKenna sat still, her hand clenched around the teacup until her knuckles turned white. Across the table where Zuri had been sitting, a single flower lay, the same kind from the conservatory, torn in half, petals scattered, like something once beautiful, now split down the middle. He saw her before he even knew he was looking. The sun was brutal that morning, low and golden, casting long shadows across the market like spilled ink. Dust clung to everything, fruit crates, bicycle tires, the rims of aluminum pots, and the air shimmered with heat and sound. Fish sellers barked their prices over the clatter of knives. Someone cursed about stolen plantains. A baby cried near the pepper stall, ignored. But through it all, one voice cut clear, steady, bright. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Fresh greens. Sweet leaves for soup, 3 bundles for 1 coin. Kwame turned his head and saw her. She was kneeling in the dirt, hands quick, folding cassava leaves into neat stacks, arms brown and strong beneath a faded cotton blouse. The sun struck her from the side, illuminating strands of her hair and the strange, shifting texture of her skin. He didn't understand at first. Then he saw the blotches, faint, scattered across her shoulders and neck, trailing to her hands. Other people had seen it too. A group of young men at a nearby yam stall laughed loudly. One of them, bare-chested and oiled like he was on his way to a fight, shouted across the row, "Hey, ghost girl, don't touch the food too long, you might curse it." A few vendors chuckled. The girl paused. She looked up. She didn't say anything, didn't lower her eyes, didn't apologize. She just stared at them until the laughter faded. Then she went back to folding her leaves. Kwame felt something shift in his chest. Not pity, not shock, recognition. He had returned from London 2 weeks ago. The heat had hit him like a slap, but so had the stillness. How everything in this place felt slower, heavier, soaked with silence under the noise. His father had expected him to jump straight into business. There were meetings lined up, board seats waiting, speeches to give. But Kwame kept slipping away, to the street corners, to the alleys he remembered, and now to the market. He had been hungry for something, though he hadn't known what, until he saw her. Amara didn't notice him at first. She was trying to fix the strap on her basket. It had snapped again, and the twine she'd used yesterday had frayed. Her fingers were raw from hauling too much weight. A cut on her palm had reopened, stinging with each movement. The tomatoes she'd bought that morning were already bruising in the heat. She couldn't afford to lose any of them. Then someone stepped into her shade. She didn't look up. 3 bundles for 1 coin, she said. A pause, then a low, clear voice. "I'll take 6. She looked. He wasn't from around here. That much was obvious. Even though he wore a plain shirt and dusty shoes, there was something about the way he stood. Straight, but not stiff. Alert, but not afraid. His skin was the color of roasted coffee, and his eyes were darker still, restless, observant, like they were always reaching beyond the moment. She studied him quickly, then held out the leaves. He placed 2 coins in her hand. She frowned. "It's only 1 coin." "I know." She stared at him. "Are you mocking me?" He shook his head once. "Your work's worth more." A few nearby vendors turned to watch. The boy who had mocked her earlier whistled. Ghost girl's got a boyfriend now." Laughter rippled. Amara stiffened. But before she could react, the man reached down and picked up her basket. She gasped. "Hey, what are you doing?" "I'm helping." "I didn't ask you to." "I didn't need you to." He started walking. She had no choice but to follow. They didn't speak for a while. He walked slowly, matching her pace, the basket balanced easily in his hands. She kept glancing sideways, trying to read him. He didn't seem to mind the weight, didn't even flinch when one of the bruised tomatoes leaked juice onto his wrist. Most people didn't look at her twice. Some stared too long, but he looked just enough. And not at her skin, at her hands, at the way she curled her fingers when nervous, the way her back straightened when someone passed too close, the way she lifted her chin, not out of arrogance, but defense. She stopped near the banana stall. "I can take it from here." He handed her the basket. Their fingers brushed. His hand was warm. She cleared her throat. "Thank you." He nodded. Then he said something she didn't expect. "You held your ground back there." She blinked. "They laugh all the time," she muttered. "It's easier if I pretend I'm deaf." "But you're not." "No." He hesitated. Then, "Do they know you?" "No." "Then their opinions don't matter." She looked at him. Really looked this time, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. Not inspected, not judged, just seen. He started to leave. She found herself asking, "What's your name?" He turned back, half smile forming. "Kwame." "Amara," she said. He nodded once, then walked away. Nyarai noticed the change that evening. Amara folded the laundry without complaining. She hummed under her breath. Even when the soup burned slightly, she didn't curse. When Nurai asked what had happened, Amara just shrugged. The market was loud, she said, but her fingers kept drifting to her collarbone, where his eyes had lingered. Kwame didn't tell anyone either. He went to the meetings his father arranged. He shook hands, made polite jokes, listened to men talk about land and numbers, but his mind kept slipping back. To that patch of market, to her voice, to the shape of her hands wrapped around leafy stems. He Googled skin conditions that night. He didn't find anything useful, but he wasn't looking for diagnosis. He was remembering how the light had danced across her shoulders. Days passed. They saw each other again, once near the spice stall, once near the water pump. Each time they spoke less, but the silence began to carry meaning. On the fourth day, he brought her oranges, not store-bought, from the tree in his backyard. She laughed. "Trying to buy your way into my good graces?" "No," he said. "Just figured your tomatoes needed backup." She smiled, soft, like something melting. But markets talk, and soon mouths moved. "Did you hear? That rich boy's hanging around the blotch girl. Maybe he's cursed too. He's just bored. She's a toy. He'll tire soon." Amara heard it all, pretended she didn't, until one afternoon she found a scrap of paper tucked into her basket. No name, just one sentence. "Even dirt can glitter if you polish it long enough." Her throat closed. The old fear returned, the one that said, "Don't believe good things." She left the market early, didn't say goodbye, didn't wait. Kwame showed up the next day. She wasn't there. The day after, still no sign. On the third day, he waited near the cassava stall until the sun set. Then he walked, all the way to the edge of the old quarter. He asked 3 vendors and 1 toothless shoemaker before he found the tin-roofed house with the purple door. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Footsteps. Then the door opened. Amara stood there. No scarf. No makeup. Just her skin, bare and real in the dying light. He didn't speak. He held out the oranges again. She looked at them, then at him, and her voice came like breath. "I'm not dirt." His reply came instantly. "I never thought you were." Something broke. Not in her, but around her. A wall, a silence, a weight. She stepped aside. Let him in. Nurai watched from the corner, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes sharp despite the dim light. She didn't say anything, just nodded once. Later that night, under the leaking tin roof, Amara looked at the sky through the holes and whispered to herself, "He saw me, not despite the skin, but through it, and I saw me too." For the first time, the knock didn't stop. It came slow at first, like someone afraid of their own knuckles. Then again, louder, 3 times. Then silence. Lorado turned her head toward the door, heart already tightening in her chest. It was past midnight. The wind outside moaned low through the cracks in the windows. Somewhere down the alley, a dog howled once and fell quiet. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just listened. The knock returned, more urgent now. She rose, legs aching beneath her nightgown, and shuffled toward the front. Another knock. She opened it. The man on the doorstep looked older than the moon. White hair slicked back, skin the color of old coffee left too long in the sun. Glasses crooked, his coat heavy, out of season, smelling faintly of mothballs and dust. But it was his eyes that gave him away, eyes that had once seen too much and tried to forget. He clutched a canvas bag to his chest like it might vanish if he let go. "I'm sorry," he said. Lorado stared at him, her hands frozen on the frame of the door. I was there," he whispered. "That night, 18 years ago, Ward B, Room 1. She didn't breathe, didn't blink. He looked down. "I've carried this for too long." The bag dropped gently into her arms. "I don't want to die with it inside me." She held it, unblinking. The street lamp buzzed above them, flickering once, then steadied. "I don't want forgiveness," he said, "just truth." Then he turned and walked away into the dark. She stood there for a long time, then closed the door. The table creaked under the weight of memory. The bag lay open now. Inside, paper, yellowed at the corners. A hospital logbook. Pages scrawled in frantic handwriting, names, times. A highlighted entry, Lorato M, 2347, girl. Minor respiratory distress, expired Azure 2. But there was more. Another page, McKenna O, 2352, girl, born healthy, observation requested privately. Then a photograph, not of a baby, of a wrist. A tiny curled hand, flesh pink with birth, marked by a hospital bracelet. Bepon 2347. Her eyes scanned the page again and again. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Then she saw the receipt. An envelope stapled to the corner of the file. Inside, a photocopy of a transfer slip. Cash. Delivered that same night. Handwritten initials at the bottom. She didn't recognize them. But the amount, too much for a standard delivery. Too much for anything but silence. Her breath caught. Then, another envelope. Inside, a single sheet. A typed letter. DNA testing facility. Clean logo at the top. Blank lines. Waiting to be filled. And a note beneath it. I am willing, I'll take the test. So should they. It's the only way to set this right. The handwriting was small, shaky, but real. Lorato sat back, her chest rising and falling too fast. The light above flickered once, then held steady. She pressed a hand to her sternum, trying to calm the storm inside. But it was no use. The ground beneath her life had cracked. A crevice had opened, and something long buried was crawling out. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. She sat by the photo frame near her bed, the one she'd kept for 18 years, a tiny sock pinned inside, a memory so thin it barely held shape. And now all of it, undone, or maybe redone. She reached for her phone, then stopped. The digits blurred. Would McKenna answer? Would Zuri believe? Would Amara? The name rolled around her mouth like a stone. Amara. Across town, Nyarai was sweeping the stoop when Lorato arrived. It was nearly dawn, the sun not yet above the roofs. Smoke from breakfast fires curled into the sky. Nyarai looked up without surprise. She always knew who would come knocking, just not when. You brought the past, she said. Lorato nodded. Nyarai stepped aside. Inside, Amara was slicing yams. Her sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms taut. Kwame was helping. He looked up, startled to see Lorato in the doorway. Amara paused. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not recognition, not yet, but something older, wiser, like two souls once touched by the same shadow. I need a moment, Lorato said. Amara stepped forward. Kwame looked at Nyarai. She nodded. He stepped back. Lorato placed the folder on the table. Opened it. Amara's eyes landed on the photo first. The bracelet. She blinked. Then again. Then picked it up. The numbers stared back. B1, 2347. I found you, Lorato whispered. I don't understand, Amara murmured, her voice brittle. You're not cursed, Lorato said. You're mine. Amara didn't speak. She couldn't. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. Lorato continued, breath shaky. You were never sick. You were taken, traded. I buried an empty story. Amara's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her knees buckled. Nyarai caught her, held her. But it was different now. The weight wasn't sorrow. It was something heavier, something hopeful. A new pain, the kind that asked, what now? 2 hours later, Kwame drove the three of them across town. The air was heavy with questions. Makina's house rose like a fortress at the end of the lane. They didn't call ahead. Lorato walked straight to the door and rang the bell. Zuri opened it. Her eyes widened. Ma'am? I need to speak with your mother, Lorato said, steady. Zuri hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes passed. Makina appeared, robe cinched too tightly at the waist, face bare. She froze when she saw Lorato, then saw Amara, then saw Nyarai, and something in her spine stiffened. What is this? Lorato opened the folder, showed the documents, showed the bracelet. Makina didn't blink. Then she saw the letter, the one from the doctor, the one with the receipt. Her lips trembled. I thought she died, Makina lied. Lorato didn't answer, just stepped forward and said, We want DNA testing for both girls, yours and mine. Zuri's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Makina. Makina looked away. And in that silence, Zuri knew. That evening at the clinic, swabs were taken. Quietly, efficiently. No press, no drama, just cotton against cheeks. And the clicking of a pen signing paperwork. Amara sat beside Lorado, still unsure how to breathe. Zuri sat across, arms folded, expression unreadable. When it was done, the nurse nodded. Results in 72 hours, and left. Amara stood slowly, walked outside. The air was cooler now. Stars flickered in patches between clouds. She pressed her palms to the railing, tried to steady herself. Behind her, footsteps. Lerato. She didn't speak, just stood beside her. They looked at the city together. Two women, one blood, one scarred, one searching, one forgiving. Then Amara whispered, "If it's true," Lerato turned. "It is." "Then what happens next?" Lerato looked down. Her voice was soft but firm. "Then we start again." The chandelier shook when her voice cut through the music. "She dares show her face here?" Glasses froze mid-air. The violinist stopped bowing mid-note. A server nearly dropped an entire tray of shrimp rolls. Makena stood at the top of the grand staircase, glittering in deep emerald silk, voice sharp enough to slice bone. Her finger pointed downward, direct, unflinching, at the girl standing near the fountain. Amara, in a borrowed dress too plain for a place like this, in second-hand heels, in skin they once called a curse. But she didn't move, didn't flinch. The marble beneath her felt cold, but her spine stayed straight. Makena stepped down slowly, each heel tapping out fury on stone. "This deformed girl thinks she belongs among us? She drags her stains into my home on a night like this?" The guests murmured. A few laughed nervously. Most just watched, curious, ready for spectacle. Obasi turned from the bar, his glass halfway to his lips. "Makena," he said, low, warning, "what's this about?" But she didn't stop. "She's a street rat, nothing more. I don't care who let her in. She doesn't belong." Enough. The voice wasn't loud, but it stopped everything. Lerato emerged from the crowd. Her dress was modest, but her presence filled the room like firelight. Behind her, Nirai walked slowly, cane tapping gently, her face unreadable. Makena blinked. "What are you—" "You asked if she belonged," Lerato said. "Let's find out." She held up an envelope, white, official, the seal of the National DNA Registry still pressed in red wax. Makena's mouth twitched. Obasi stepped forward now, face darkening. "What is that?" "The truth," Lerato answered. Amara didn't speak. She looked at the envelope like it might burst into flames. Makena laughed once, hollow. "What is this? Some charity stunt? You want to embarrass me with paperwork?" Lerato handed the file to Obasi. He opened it. "Read." Then again, his brow furrowed. "What is this saying?" "It says," Lerato began, her voice steady, "that your wife gave birth to a daughter 18 years ago, a daughter born at 2347. She was recorded as dead." Makena's jaw locked. But she wasn't. Nirai stepped forward now, slowly placing a small item on the glass table between them. A plastic hospital bracelet, faded white. B1-2347. Several guests gasped. Zuri, standing behind Makena, took a step forward. Lerato's voice wavered now, but only slightly. "Makena paid to take my child, my healthy girl. She left me with death." Eyes turned. Someone whispered Zuri's name, but Lerato kept going. "This is a match report, 2 DNA profiles, Amara, Zuri, and the mothers who raised them." She paused. Amara's breath shook. Then the words landed. "Amara is Makena's daughter." The room tilted. Gasps bloomed like firecrackers. Makena's lip quivered. Her eyes darted to Amara, to her cheekbones, to the shape of her eyes, her height, her skin. Then to Zuri, standing behind her. "Zuri," Lerato said softly, "is mine." Zuri's mouth opened, but no sound came. She stepped backward, then forward again. She looked at Makena. "Is it true?" Makena turned away. Zuri's voice cracked now. "Is it true?" Makena didn't answer. Obasi stared at the documents. His hand trembled. Zuri walked forward, stared at the bracelet. then at Amara, then at Lorato. She was breathing too fast now, like the room had shrunk. She whispered, I don't understand. Amara moved closer, not to speak, just to stand. Zuri backed away. Obasi looked at McKenna. Tell me you didn't. McKenna reached for the wall. Obasi, I didn't know. I thought the child was sick. They said she'd die. I did what was best for... You lied. He said it quietly, but it landed like thunder. I buried a daughter I never held, Lorato said, tears falling now. I searched faces for years, thinking maybe she'd survived, but I never imagined the woman who took her would raise my child in her place. McKenna's knees gave. She sank into the nearest chair. I gave her everything, she whispered, eyes wide. I gave Zuri the world. You gave her your lies, Lorato said. I loved her, but she was never yours. Silence, dense, crushing. Then, shoes on marble. Two men in dark suits stepped forward from the entrance. Not guests. One wore a badge on his hip. The other carried a folder. McKenna looked up. No, Obasi didn't stop them. Neither did Zuri. One officer placed a hand gently on McKenna's shoulder. She didn't resist. Couldn't. The guests said nothing. Not one whisper now. Only the music still played. Soft, classical, surreal. It had never been turned off. Amara watched as McKenna was led away. Not with anger, but something deeper. A sorrow too large for words. She turned to Lorato. Their eyes met. And in that moment, the daughter who had been lost and the mother who had been robbed finally saw each other in full. The market didn't speak when she stepped into it. Not at first. Not with words. Just the soft shuffle of sandals against dirt, the sizzle of oil over fire, the creak of old wood under sun-fat baskets. But no laughter. No whispering behind cracked fingernails. No curses thrown like stones. Only silence and breath and eyes. Dozens of them, watching her walk down the same narrow path where they once hurled slurs like rotten fruit. The girl with the patchwork skin, the ghost, the curse. But now nothing, or maybe something new. Stillness. That kind of quiet that falls not from fear but from shame, from awe, from the weight of truth landing like morning dew. Amara kept walking, step by step, shoulders straight. The blue scarf around her neck caught the breeze, fluttering like a flag no one knew they needed to salute. And beside her, his hand in hers. Warm, steady, never letting go. Kwame walked like he had nothing to prove, only something to protect. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just stood tall, as if he knew his silence said more than any declaration could. They passed the pepper stall where boys once mocked her. One of them looked up, saw her, then looked away. She didn't flinch, didn't gloat. Her grip on Kwame's hand only tightened. Auntie Noku stood at her yam table, arms folded, lips pressed tight. She nodded once, slow, deliberate. A man near the tomatoes bent his head. A woman Amara didn't know pulled her child behind her, whispering something too soft to hear. Then a voice rang out from the far side. It cracked through the hush like a branch snapping in dry air. My soup's been bitter since you stopped selling me greens. Amara turned. It was the old baker, the one with the limp. He held out a small pouch. Coins. Come, he said. Let the hands that fed me once feed me again. And just like that, the market breathed again. The wind moved. A baby cried. A rooster crowed late. Someone clapped, once unsure. Then again. Then more. Hands reached for her leaves, others for her smile. And Amara gave both. She knelt, opened her basket, and sold what little she'd brought. People bought quickly. Some with coins, some with silence, some with the quiet ache of apology in their eyes. And all the while, Kwame stood behind her like a tree she could lean against if she needed. But she didn't. Not today. Across the road, a car door opened. Lorato stepped out, wearing the same scarf she'd worn the day she buried an empty cradle. But her eyes were full now, of light, of blood, of home. Amara saw her, stopped. The air between them felt fragile like wet glass. Neither moved, for a long stretch second. Then Amara stepped forward. Only one step, But it was enough. Lorado opened her arms. Amara collapsed into them, not like a child, like a woman who had carried too much for too long. Lorado held her, tighter than grief, softer than memory. "I don't know what to call you," Amara whispered, voice shaking. "You don't have to call me anything," Lorado said. "I've waited 18 years just to hold you." People watched, but no one interrupted, not even the market. Zuri stood near the sugar stall, hair tied back, no makeup, eyes raw from the night before. She saw them, mother and daughter, wrapped in something bigger than forgiveness. And she didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply stood there, arms folded, and nodded once, as if telling the truth. "I see it. I feel it. And even though it hurts, I won't look away." Kwame stepped beside her. They didn't speak. He simply handed her a small tangerine. Zuri peeled it slowly. The skin fell to the ground in a spiral. From across the street, beneath the low awning of an abandoned stall, Nirai sat on a wooden bench, chewing salted ground nuts from an old tin cup. She watched everything, didn't move, didn't smile. But her chest rose once deep, then settled. She reached into the pocket of her faded coat, pulled out the bracelet, still whole, still marked, Bébillon, 23:47. She placed it on the bench beside her. Let the wind take it if it wanted. Then she stood and walked away. As the sun climbed higher, Amara helped an old woman load plantains into a basket. Sweat slid down her neck. Dust clung to her heels. She didn't mind. Someone handed her a cool rag. Another gave her a mango. Free, they said. She accepted both. She wasn't queen here, wasn't saint. She was just someone who had come back, whole and standing. The wind tugged at her sleeve. She turned. Kwame stood beside her again, holding out a folded cloth. "Let's go," he said. "Where?" "Forward." She laughed once low, then followed. They walked down the same road she once limped across, carrying shame instead of cassava. Now the air didn't taste bitter. It tasted like sweat and street dust and mango skins. And something else, like hope with calloused hands. They passed a puddle where children were kicking water. A boy with a runny nose pointed at her. "She's the one with magic skin," he said. His sister slapped his arm. "Don't say that." "It's true," he insisted. "Mama said her skin's made of light and shadow and stars." Amara laughed, then crouched beside him. "It's just skin," she said. "But it glows," the boy whispered. She didn't correct him. She let him believe. Maybe he was right. Amina Sanar. That night, the sky hung low with clouds. No moon, only street lamps glowing dull gold. Inside the little house with a tin roof patched twice, Amara stood by the basin, washing greens for the next day. Lorado stirred soup behind her. Kwame dried dishes. Zuri sat in the corner, reading slowly, aloud, her voice soft, stumbling sometimes. And Nirai slept near the window, wrapped in the same scarf she'd worn when she pulled a baby from a trash bin long ago. Amara looked at them all, then out the window. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. The patches of her skin caught the lamplight. They no longer looked strange. They looked like sky after storm. Raw, beautiful, alive. She smiled, but it didn't come from her lips. It came from someplace deeper. From the place that once cried in silence, that once bled, invisible, that once dreamed of being seen. She pressed her palm to the window. It left no mark. But inside her, a name finally settled. Not the one given, not the one stolen, just the one she'd earned. Amara, the one who lived. There are stories that shout and there are stories that whisper. This one does both. Because sometimes the deepest truths don't come wrapped in grand speeches or loud victories. They arrive quietly, through tears, through scars, through hands held in silence. This was never just about betrayal or justice or redemption. It was about what happens after the world turns its back on someone and they choose, against all odds, to keep walking forward. It was about the power of quiet defiance, of those who plant seeds in burned soil, of those who carry memory like armor and kindness like fire, of those who refuse to become what hurt them. It was about healing, not as a moment, but as a long, winding road, muddy, uneven, and sacred. about how pain doesn't vanish but transforms, about how dignity can grow from the very places meant to break us. In a world quick to judge and quicker to forget, this story reminds us that there's a strength in gentleness, a rebellion in choosing compassion, and a revolution in simply surviving with your soul intact. We all carry pieces of silence within us, moments we never told, wounds we buried deep, names we whispered only when the lights went out. But sometimes, in the right light, even broken things shine, and that is enough. So if this story moved you, if it stirred something you didn't know how to name, let it stay with you. Let it echo in the quiet. Let it remind you that even in the darkest corners, there is always a way back to the light. Thank you for listening, truly. If this journey resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story waiting to be told. Until then, hold on to kindness and walk gently. Someone might be following your footsteps.